All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're rolling. Special guest today, Darren Wayman. I'm so excited that you're here. You're the risk manager for Plata County, but for anybody listening, I've known Darren for years, and I'm going to share a little bit of a backstory about why I'm so excited for this conversation. So Darren and I, what year was EMT class? Was that 20?
It was winter 2018 and 19.
2018, yeah. So Darren and I went to night EMT classes together in 2018, 2019. To paint the picture, dead of winter, both of us live in a town that was about an hour away from where EMT class was. And we had an arrangement where we would alternate who drove, every class. And I think classes were 2 nights a week or something like that. Yeah. And of course, it was like the heaviest winter ever. And so by nature, Darren and I got 4 hours a week together in a car, driving back and forth from, Bayfield late at night. And I thoroughly enjoy, and there are actually some fond memories of mine because I got to get to know you better. And we got to talk about, life, love, the pursuit of happiness, investing in the stock market. In fact, that was kind of really what got me. I had already, I think, dabbled in some of my investing, journey, but sitting there talking to you got me reinvigorated on it. And we would talk about business and personal development. And I thoroughly enjoyed those captive, hour on each side, a lot of the times in blizzard snowstorm conditions and late at night when we were all tired and all that stuff. And I just thoroughly enjoyed it. And, you've been always very fond of my relationship with you. You're somebody that I've always looked up to. We volunteered on the fire department together for a while. I've seen you have multiple jobs. I've seen you have multiple kids now. I've seen you be a great husband and a great father and all of that. And now the most recent chapter, you're officially a published author. That's right. Which I feel like is just so cool. And I read the book. I read your book. For everybody listening, you need to check it out. It's Lion Learns Humility, and we're going to talk about it a little bit today for sure. But more than that, I'm just excited to sit and talk to Darren again. I'm stoked about it. So I want to hear the background. I don't want to talk about the book specifically yet, but what I want to talk about is what triggered you to write a book. Because you're one of those guys, I hope you don't get offended by this. You're quiet by nature, and you're a little bit, I don't know if reserved is the right word, but there's a lot to you once you get in and start talking. And so I'm fascinated with it. What I'm getting at is that I wouldn't have thought of you as a children's book author off the surface, but it's a great book and there's more and all this stuff that I want to dive into. But I want to hear the background. What prompted you originally to write your first, to write the book? What was the thought process? Where were you at? And what kind of, talk me through the series of events to you kind of sitting down and putting pen to paper.
Yeah, of course. And Ben, thanks for having me. It's certainly a privilege to be here. And it's been fun to see your progression as a podcaster, starting with your first few episodes. And then I think when this comes out, it'll be in, the 50s.
Oh, this is my 50th episode.
This will be 50th.
This is a big day.
Right. Yep,
this is number 50.
There
So
we go.
Thank you. Yeah,
of course.
I'm going to get you a special shirt that says 50 or something.
Perfect. There we go. Yeah. No, it's been fun to see your progression as a podcaster and your delivery and your level of comfort and confidence in doing your podcasting. It's been fun to see that growth and development. And,
thank you.
Not everybody has that charisma X factor. Not everybody can be a Will Smith or a Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, but you do. And it's nice to have this platform where the world can see that, beyond, those with whom you work within the Plata County. So it's nice to have this huge platform where people can really see that, because not everybody has that. Not everybody should, but the very few who do, they need to be seen by the world. And I'm glad you have this platform now.
I appreciate that a ton. Thank you.
Of course. And thinking back to our windshield time days, going to EMT class, I also want to brag on you about that a little bit too, in that we talked about life goals, and where we were going. And I think it was coming up on New Year's, and we were talking about, New Year's resolutions. What are we going to do? And you had it laid out. You had 5 or 6 or so resolutions. And at that time, you hadn't run a single marathon. And you said, I would like to run a marathon.
Oh my gosh, I forgot about that.
You didn't have an investment property yet. You said, I'd like to invest in some property. And I don't know if it came to business, but you'd certainly talked about wanting to continue to grow and develop and have more autonomy and ownership of what you were doing. And it's fun that was winter 2018, and here we are sitting summer 2024, and not only have you run a marathon, you've run one every year since then. You've also worked on a 50-mile ultra marathon and then finished a 100-mile ultra marathon. And you're just going to continue to go at it, and on a professional level, you've got this new business and this new podcast venture, and you have all these irons in the fire. And it's fun to see that progression and look back and say, these are the goals he had set at that time, and to see how far you've come with that. I think when we set goals, sometimes we're always future looking, and sometimes it's nice to sit down and look at those goals past looking and say, look at what we accomplished. Look where we are now.
I got to tell you, I'm so appreciative of the fact that you brought that up. I have a tendency sometimes of maybe being too growth mind, too future looking, as you mentioned. That is so fun because it's funny because those 2018, the windshield days for us, simultaneously feels like it was yesterday and feels like it was a lifetime ago, and to be able to look back and say, wow, look how things have progressed. I don't think, or I had Nathan, but you didn't have any kids yet. And, I don't know, just looking at that, what a cool exercise for you to suggest right there of looking at goals backwards,
right?
Looking at the goals that we set. It's like, I've heard somebody say before that don't forget that you used to wish you were where you are today. Yeah. You've hoped for these things now. I'm so glad you brought that up. Thank you. That's
Absolutely.
a great just reminder on perspective and, remembering how far we've come. And plus now we're all way into rec league softball and, everything keeps evolving that way too. But no, that's awesome. Yeah, those were, a lot of that too for me. And I appreciate you for this. I've got gratitude for you for this. Is so much of, I think, there's power in accountability and sharing, goals and dreams and visions. So much of my life, I think, has been putting myself in the right room, so to speak, of people that I aspire to be like, or people that I can learn from, or, grow to be like, or these things like that. And I learned so much from you those days of driving back and forth and just learning your approach and your mindset. And it's so much of the stuff that I'm super excited to dive into today, because there are at least 6, and I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but there's some Darren-isms, I'm going to say, that I'm stoked about. But thank you for that, for bringing back those memories and the reversal look at the goals, because that's an important exercise. That's cool. I appreciate that.
Yeah, of course. It really is. Because if you're always looking forward to the goals you want to accomplish, then it seems like maybe you're not making a lot of progress instead of looking back at the ones you have accomplished. There's a good book called The Happiness Hypothesis, and it talks about how too often our thinking is, if I do this, then I will be happy. And he says, why don't you flip that and say, if I am happy, then I will do this.
Ooh.
And that's his approach, and that's kind of a similar thought of, if I look at what I've accomplished and I'm happy with where I'm going, then I will continue to accomplish more.
Right.
And so it's fun to look back and take that look. So
have you been able to apply that in your life, reversing that kind of happiness hypothesis? Is that something that you practice?
Actively. I mean, and we've had similar conversations about my, continual effort working on optimism and how you tend to have a very optimistic outlook, and I don't so much, partly through the nature of my job and what I do, that I'm programmed professionally to look for that, for the negative, also as an individual. And so I've read that book, and I've read similar stuff like that in order to try to continue to develop myself and improve my level of optimism. And that was just one of those ones where being happy in the moment can then lead to future success.
Yeah, I like that. I'm interested in your perspective or kind of your mindset, because as I've gotten to know you too, I've noticed that you have some intentionality behind a lot of your efforts, or where you put energy or whatever it might be. For example, right now we're talking about that kind of intentional, the happiness hypothesis or whatever it might be. I'm curious, just to get into your brain a little bit, when you're looking at sort of those, I'll call them self-growth, or, things that we want to be better at, or whatever it might be, that I've observed that intentionality from you that comes from it. Talk me through your mindset on that, because it seems to me like you've got kind of this, I don't know, it's almost, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it's almost like you identify something that you want to grow on, whether it's that, like I've seen you train for these adventure races that you do, or the happiness hypothesis, or whatever it might be. And you almost have this kind of like methodical, sort of stoic approach to that thing. It's very directed and intentional, it seems like. And I'm just kind of curious where that comes from, or your mindset behind that, or kind of how you're approaching those, I'll call them growth opportunities. How do you approach it?
Sure. And you're certainly right. Definitely intentionality to things, and that's just the nature of my personality. And I think that's why we've also developed a degree of mutual respect, in that we couldn't be more opposite, right? You're happy being the center of the room. I would rather be a wallflower. Like, you have this energetic, gravitational personality, and you've alluded to it. I have a bit of a rough exterior. My wife calls me a pineapple.
It's not rough.
I'm rough and prickly on the outside, and then maybe once you get to the inside, it gets a little bit sweeter. But
you have layers. It's not rough.
Yeah. No, and I'm okay with that. I recognize who I am and how I relate to other people. But I think we have a degree of mutual respect, and so that
100%.
allows us to have that relationship, even though we're polar opposites.
Yeah.
And it's really fun. But being intentional, that's just part of my personality. Identifying things, also a degree of continual effort to have self-awareness and recognize strengths and weaknesses and what I can work on, and how I can continue to develop, which in a sense takes a degree of humility to say, hey, I do have these faults, or I do have these downsides that maybe I can't course correct, but I can just rely on my strengths and offset them, or I can surround myself with other people who can pick up these things that, where I'm lacking. But it's more of a personality thing, where I've just always been very intentional with how I approach things, and I really break it down to a granular level, sometimes to the extent where it's detrimental to me, right? I've often caught myself, not accepting something even though it was good, because I was in the pursuit of perfect, and I let perfect get in the way of good. And I do that a lot, and I have to stop myself and recognize when it may be good enough. And I have a coworker who's, similar to you in that he's very much a driver personality. He's go, 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 go. And we laugh about it, because if it was my, if I had the chance, I would take 100% of the information before I made the choice. And I know that's not healthy. That's not good. But you talk about being methodical. That's just the nature of who I am.
Right.
And my coworker, shout out to Ray Shoup, who, retired law enforcement after 29 years serving our community. But he says, I'll take 60% of the information. I'm good to go. Like, he's fine with 60%. And then he acknowledges, I could probably use it to get more information. And we recognize if we both just come together and get 75%, we're going to be fine.
See, and I'm over here with 15% of the information, just trusting my, emotions. But there's such validity to that of, like, first of all, the mutual respect thing, and the, and what a cool thing to consider about the foundation of a relationship, being found a foundation of respect, and I'd even say admiration on a lot of levels, knowing that, personality traits are so different, and knowing that there's something to learn from the other person too. Like, I see how especially when we've gone on calls together at the fire department or in EMT class or whatever, that's really when I've gotten to see kind of your full information, personality kind of come to fruition. And I actually have a lot to learn from that sense, where I tend to kind of fire from the hip, and I would make a terrible risk manager if that makes sense. But yeah, that's an interesting thing to think about, is like just the different, yet though there's still this commonality of like things that we can improve on, and, being growth minded and things like that. Has that always been a mindset of yours, or has that become more prevalent as you've gotten older? Has any of that changed with having kids and things like that? Kind of how you look at your approach to yourself and your own kind of personal development?
I think it's certainly become more prevalent as I've gotten older. In school, middle school, high school, you're pretty self-centered, at least I was, and you're worried about your social life and relationships and sports and whatever's important to you at the time, and maybe not so focused on personal growth, self-development, because you're just so ingrained in every other things. But I think since then it's certainly been the case, and definitely in the professional world and working around some phenomenal professionals where you recognize I have a lot to learn and I've got a long ways to go if I want to, be similar to that person, be that consummate professional that person is, whom I respect.
Do you think you'd mentioned earlier in other aspects of your life, sort of a pursuit of perfection and sometimes being unsatisfied with good because you're pursuing perfection? Does that apply to how you see yourself sometimes? Like, are you in that group too? Like that you're pursuing perfection personally, or are you able to say like, hey, Darren's pretty cool. Darren's pretty good as is. Like, what I just want to get in your mind a little bit on how you view that kind of growth mentality.
Yeah, that's definitely the case. That's how I view myself. I don't think I'll ever get to a point where I'm like, hey, I'm good or I'm perfect. Like, and maybe that lends to the constant pursuit of trying to, constant pursuit of self-development because of that mindset. And often it's detrimental, and I'm trying to, spin it in a positive manner. But it's just been a constant pursuit of being satisfied with what I do, the work I produce, and who I am as a person. And I see those traits. I see them on my dad a lot, the way he talks to himself, and I see them on my brothers. I think it's just a family thing. I've learned it from my parents, and then they've passed it along the way, and something I'm constantly working on. And I've done, some therapy sessions on talking about it. I know one point I hit a salary milestone in my job, and I did it in 1 year instead of 5. 5 was my goal to hit the salary milestone, and I did it in 1 year. And I was chatting with a therapist, and I was like, I don't feel any different. I'm not satisfied, and I'm not happy with this, and I'm here, but what do I do? Like, do I sit there and just stare at the check? How do I celebrate this? Like, there's nothing, like I made it, but I don't know if I feel any different. And so working through that, and that was definitely passed on how my dad coached us too. Like I remember one particular baseball game, it hit a home run at an important moment in the game, and after the game, first thing my dad says is, hey, when you hit a home run, make sure you run the bases faster. And, same with a football game. Like I break a long run against one of our, rivals. And after the game, he say, hey, when you score a touchdown, make sure you celebrate with your team a little more. And I'm like, Dad, I'm trying to get off so a field goal team can get in. He's like, nope, celebrate with your team, acknowledge your offensive line. Like, so there was always good things, but then it was like, okay, here's what you can do to improve next. Here's what's next.
Right. What a fine line, because I love that pursuit of, improvement and like the perfecting thing, obviously not at the detriment of enjoyment and self-satisfaction and stuff like that. What's your approach? Because now you have 2 kids, right? Not
2
3,
kids.
2. Yeah, 2. Thank you. I get on a podcast and I start to forget stuff.
Right.
What's your approach to, that as a father? Like how are you approaching that with your, with your kids, and the way that you want to instill some of that, like, because I feel like there's a very delicate line there of like, we do want to still improve. We do want to still get better, of course. I mean, I believe a lot of the trajectory in my life has been that growth mindset, like not being satisfied. I mean, it comes back a lot to what you're saying about how powerful it is to look at goals backwards. So I'm curious, because you definitely still, I would assume, want to have, growth-minded children and kids that want to be improving. Just curious, like your thoughts, and, with the caveat that none of us are perfect, so I know that. But how do you approach, what's your kind of approach or intention, or kind of your philosophy when it comes to that side of it with your kids?
Yeah. No, great question. And none of this is to speak down on my dad or anything. He's got high standards, and I love and respect that man to death.
You turned out okay.
He did all right. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's certainly a balance there. Absolutely. And I think his folks were even harder on him.
Of course.
And so he's loosened up a little bit. And I think I want to try to loosen up a little bit too, and find that right balance, because you can also get too loose where, so I'm not a participation trophy kind of parent, and I want to make sure that when I recognize my kids, they're genuinely being recognized, because if everything's a celebration, then nothing's a celebration. Just like I tell my coworkers at work, if everything's a priority, then nothing's a priority. Like, you have to be able to make that distinction, and everything can't be treated the same. And so sometimes my 5-year-old son will bring some artwork home that he's proud of, and I can't tell what it is, and I don't know what it looks like, and I'm not going to say, oh, that's wonderful. I'm just going to say, that's interesting. Okay, that's why did you choose those colors? Or I'll just ask questions about it, but I'm not necessarily going to celebrate it.
Right.
But if there's something that he genuinely does that I really want to acknowledge and appreciate it, I'm going to celebrate it.
Yeah.
And then he can tell the difference. He's 5, but he's smart enough to tell the difference of when I'm really just, giving him lip service versus genuinely giving him a compliment.
Authentically excited.
That's
yeah.
it. Yeah, just remaining authentic with him. And I'll do that with both my kids. So 5-year-old son, 1-year-old daughter. And I'll try to take that balanced approach. And I'm sure I'll be out of alignment, and he'll have to try to make up for my mistakes, down the road, or my approach down the road. And that's totally fine.
I had just last week, and his episode comes out a week from today, Dr. Doug Miller, psychologist. I don't know if you know him or not. He's a great guy. I love our conversations. But we had a whole conversation about parenting last week. And the joke at the end of it was like, this is awesome because now we can mess our kids up in whole new ways. Now we can break, generational traumas and start new ones. And it was funny, just kind of laughing about how, the best we try as parents, we're obviously going to be far, far from perfect. But I do think that our kids pick up on intention. We talked about the intentionality with which I feel like you do things. Because I think, that's one thing I've observed with you is you think everything through. Like there's I can tell that like analysis has happened, in your mind, whatever the decision is, if it's firefighting or EMT or your career choice or, whatever it might be. There's been times, and I'm trying to think of examples right now, but there's been times when I've like something has occurred and I've realized that was a very thought through, it wasn't spontaneous at all. It maybe wasn't talked about or anything, but I could tell that you thought it through. And anyway, my point is that I think that our kids know that, which at least gives me a little bit of hope, that like they know we're at least trying,
Right.
Giving it the best that we've got.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that kind of, ties back into the book too. Some of the initial questions you had asked about of, you didn't, see me as someone who
as a writer,
or, someone in the creative element.
Yeah. In fact, I'm glad as a creative, that's a better word for it. Have you been creative? Is this are you new to the creative space, or are there some secret, Darren creativity that we haven't seen yet?
I think there are, but it's for those who are closest to me. You know? So it's not something I just throw out there immediately. And like I said, I prefer to keep a low profile, and even podcasting here is a big step for me, just to be so visible. But there's intentionality, and there's creative stuff that I've done in the past, and I've always gravitated to writing in one way or another. Embarrassingly enough, in middle school and high school, I consisted of writing songs for my girlfriends. But as I say,
sing one for us. I'm kidding.
No, right. But as I said, one of whom was my high school sweetheart, and who is now my wife and has been my partner for 15 or so years.
Ooh, good to know. So I can ask Bonnie about the
you
songs.
Can ask.
Okay,
she might still have copies.
Awesome.
Yeah, but, so there's always been a writing element and an enjoyment of creativity, and it's funny though, because the only class that any level of schooling, any class that I've received a C in was creative writing in high school.
Of course.
And it wasn't necessarily because I, couldn't do it correctly. It was because I felt like a lot of it came so naturally that sometimes I lost interest in the assignments. The stuff that I would turn in would often get read by the teacher or be part of, the learning material. I remember one assignment, he wanted us to pretend to plead ignorance and write a letter to someone pretending we didn't know what was going on. So his example was, okay, write a letter to Walmart and ask them why there's not any walls for sale in Walmart. And that was kind of the cheesy example. And so mine was, I was an 84-year-old elderly man who listened to Eminem religiously because I loved the candy. And I was writing him a letter saying, I don't understand your music yet. I'm trying to find, the metaphors and the analogies for M&Ms and these chocolate candies that I love so much, and I just don't understand it. Can you help me understand more? And that was the assignment. And he was happy to read that right away, and I knocked it out of the park. But there were some other assignments where I was just like, this is pretty ho-hum. So
was the assignment the ignorance piece or the details of listening to Eminem? Did you come up with that? Or
it was just pleading ignorance.
You came up with that concept even?
Yeah.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
That's creative right there. I it's interesting. And after reading the book, you're a great writer. You're very talented at writing. And I'm excited because this book especially is cool because there's layers of messaging in it that I and I'm sure I missed many of them, but even me reading it, I was like, oh, cool. All these things. I have no idea this, but I would speculate that a lot of creatives did poorly in the formal education system in the aspect of their creativity. I don't know that, but I wouldn't be surprised at all if there are musicians that did bad in, high school music class, or artists that didn't do well because it's like
you feel constrained.
Yeah.
You're saying, just let me go, let me run.
Yeah. It's like not built. Those are built for guys like me to learn how to, do those things and get enough to at least function in the world, where when you're truly creative, it's probably too much of a parameter than all of that. I also just saw recently an idea as it relates to creativity that have you ever read the book Hidden Genius?
No.
I'll get you a copy of it. I'm about halfway through it. The author's name is Paulina, and I'm forgetting her last name. But there's a chapter in it that's called Unleashing Your Creativity, and then it's your hidden creative genius. And basically what it says is that, first of all, creativity is something that can be learned and practiced. We can actually hone in a skill set of creativity. But the second thing I took away from it was, to be truly creative, you actually have to know the rules so then that you can break them, which I thought was an interesting approach. A lot of people think that a creative is somebody who, you have that vision of like the painter throwing splatter at the wall and like there's this creative brilliance, where it's really like you got to understand the rules and then break them a little bit. And I picked up on a little bit in this book, because there's almost like a rhythm to the writing and the I'm going to call it poetry. I don't know if that's an okay, but it rhymes, and
the stanzas, the manuscript.
Yeah, but you can tell it's broken just enough, if that makes sense. Like there's some when it doesn't fit, and then the messaging gets there. And I don't know if that was intentional or not, but I picked up on just some of that stuff where, like, as I was reading it to myself, I would catch myself in a rhythm and then I would break the rhythm. And some of that would kind of, it made messaging resonate in a more powerful way, which I just think is interesting. Because, again, coming back to that, I had no idea that my friend Darren was a creative, and I feel like I know you pretty well. So I think that's fascinating too. So writing in high school, writing, songs to Bonnie, which I'm probably going to need to do a whole follow-up podcast episode with Bonnie about the songs.
Sure.
But any gaps there, or have you continued kind of enjoying writing as an outlet into adulthood? And just kind of, I would love to hear the progression from you as writing as a creative outlet, and how that's looked.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. And, there's other areas where I'm able to explore creativity with my wife. Sometimes for birthdays or anniversaries or something, I'll put together a treasure hunt of things from our past that are significant, or put together a word search of words that only she and I know the significance of, based on things we've shared in the past, and things of that nature, just to make it fun. So I find outlets like that. Writing's been off and on. It's funny, I look back, and it was my folks who really encouraged me in high school to continue writing and to continue to pursue it and do it. And it kind of fell off for several years. And but it's funny, you talk about the creative process, and normally I'm very structured in how I do things and how I put things down.
Yeah.
But my wife even pointed this out for me, and she said that if you look at some of my manuscripts or the raw drafts of the stuff that I write, there's just stuff everywhere. Like, I'm in the margins, I'm turning the page, and I just need some space right now because here's the thought and I got to get it out. And so that's how the manuscripts look. So there's a degree of that where I just you talk about breaking the rules, or even breaking my own rules. Everything goes out the window when I really get into a flow, and I'm just like, I got to get this down. It doesn't matter how pretty it looks. Like, I'll figure it out later. I just need to do this. And so my rough draft writing process looks very different than what the final product
Fascinating.
does. Yeah. But kept with it a little bit. And actually the idea, well, even before this, I've attempted to start a couple different full novels, usually on the darker end of things, which is funny that now we're looking at a children's book. And I'd find myself getting overwhelmed. Again, perfect getting in the way of good.
Yeah.
And it was such a huge task. And I think just knowing myself and understanding that often I get overwhelmed by the elephant versus breaking it down into pieces and, bite by bite, kind of the old analogy. So I had started and stopped on 2 novels that I still think have promise for those who want to delve into that kind of dark content. And I was like, why don't I condense it and just make it something more approachable for me, knowing my personality? And I know there's a whole thing about, the book Good to Great and making big, hairy, audacious goals. And there's a time and place for that. But in my case, I just felt like it kept getting me stuck. And so I had to break it down even smaller. Let me try a children's book. And of course, my kids were the catalyst for it all.
Yeah.
I had kids. We were reading 3 books a night, and we read enough. And I was just like, I can do this. And it wasn't just that. Then it led to my son and I, instead of doing 3 books a night, he would ask for, okay, let's do 2 books and a story. And the story would be an improvised story. He would give me 3 topics that he wanted included in the story, and I would make it up off the cuff. We'd lay in his bed, we'd read the 2 books, and then we'd do the story. And he'd say, in this story, I want me, our dog, and a floating light. Okay, let's do it. And then I would just run with a story and make it up. And he really enjoyed that too. And I was like, maybe there's something here. Maybe there's something I can do here. And so
that also speaks, by the way, just to your approach as a father. I just want to give you some kudos for that, because taking the time to read 2 stories and then make up a story is remarkable. That's another good illustration of where we tend to fall on different ends of the spectrum. I don't have patience for it. I have the love for it, but not the. So anyway, I just think that's what you just said is indicative of your approach to fatherhood on a larger level, is what I'm getting at. I think that's amazing.
Well, thank
that you take the time to do that with your kids, and the fact that it kind of aligns with a passion of yours and a talent of yours and things like that. That's just it's really cool. So just, sorry to interrupt, but just a quick anecdote on how neat I think that is.
Well, thank you. Yeah. And I enjoyed it. My son enjoyed it, and we just had fun with it. And same deal. My wife was like, I would never make up a story on the spot. And it's like, that's okay. You have all these talents that I don't, and we complement each other. And that's why we have a great partnership, because we complement each other, But anyways, I had the outline for Lion Learns Humility in early 2020. It was on like a 1-inch by 1-inch margin on 1 page. I had started the manuscript. I had a few stanzas down. This page is now on my website where you can find the book.
Awesome.
But in the margin, it said something in the nature of snake swim, parrot beak, and monkey swing. That was it. It was 6 words essentially. And that was the general idea. And I saw that and I thought, I've got something here. I have the concept. I love the title, the alliteration first off, but then also you think of a lion and you think of the king of the jungle and proud, and it's not lost on me that a group of lions is called a pride, which would essentially be the opposite of humility.
Yeah.
Right. And all these elements just came together, and I was like, I've got something here. And I put it down. And again, this was early 2020, and I put it down, and I didn't come back to it until March 23. And I think part of that was, honestly, fear of maybe I do have something here and maybe I can't deliver. Maybe I'm not actually a good enough writer to deliver on this concept. Or a fear of, I think it's good, but maybe once I put it out into the world, nobody else does and nobody cares. And so I think that fear stopped me from continuing with it. And I don't know what it was come March 2023. I think all of our worlds were different between 2020 and 2023 with everything that happened. But I picked it up again, and I decided, I'm going to commit to this. I'm going to finish this, and I'm going to have a book. And deadlines spur action. I gave myself some incremental deadlines of when this should happen, and that got me on my way.
It's amazing. What gave you any idea or insight? And I want to dive more into the concepts of the book, but from you, as the writer and just as a person, what changed to kind of give you the courage to put it out there? Because I relate in a huge way, to the fear side of it. Like, I think this is good, but who knows? Or am I the only one who thinks it's good? Or what if it is good, but I'm not the guy that's good enough to, execute on it and pull it off, or whatever it might be. I mean, imposter syndrome is probably a simple way to describe it. But I'm just kind of curious, and because I think, especially for people listening, there's probably a lot of people that have talents that are, untapped or unseen or, held back because of fear. What for you was the catalyst? Like did something outside change? Did something inside change? What made you say, okay, I'm going to do it even though I'm scared? What was the driving force behind that?
Sure. I think part of it was looking at those I look up to and idols, whether I know them directly or I don't know them whatsoever, and seeing times when they stumbled or seeing times when they even fell down or made mistakes, and being able to take them off that pedestal and just recognize them as a person and humanize them and recognize, they're not where they are because they have some impossible talent that nobody else does. They're not there because they pulled a magic trick, that nobody else can. They're there because of their personal qualities, and they were willing to see it through to the end. And then honestly, when I wanted to pick it up again, I was so excited by the process, and
which matters,
right? The process, I really enjoyed that. And Nick Saban references aside, talking about the process, but I loved the process, and I loved writing. And at that point, my kids were a driving factor, and I wanted to put this out. This book's dedicated to my son. I wanted to put it out for him and dedicate it to him and normalize something like this for him. I think about like Steph Curry, basketball player in the NBA. His dad played basketball in the NBA. So when your dad plays basketball in the NBA, as a kid, you grow up and maybe it doesn't seem like this far-fetched of an idea of, I'm going to play in the NBA someday. You're like, that's what my dad did. That's what we do as a family. I'm going to do it. And then you normalize it. And now their dad played in the NBA. Steph and Seth, brothers, they both play in the NBA. It's just what they do as a family, right? You normalize something like that. And so if I can do stuff like this, if you can run 100 miles, we can normalize things like that for our kids, where it doesn't seem like this far-fetched idea that you can't reach and that you can't achieve. Hey, we do it in this family. This is things we do. We have these things that we want to do. We have these things that we enjoy, these talents that we have, and we pursue what we want to do, and we normalize it.
Love that. And so what you're meaning is normalizing the pursuit of dreams, like normalizing getting out of the comfort zone, executing, trying. Obviously, the content in the book is valuable, but that desire to like set the example and normalize for your kids that we can do hard stuff.
That's it.
We can pursue it. I love that. Yeah, that's so cool. In fact, last week when I was talking to Doug, I was talking to him about like some of the dangers of us on our phones and things like that. And he was basically saying a very similar thing. Like that will teach your kids that that's what dads do. Mm-hmm. Like they're going to pay way more attention to what we do than what we say. Yep. And, I, of course, followed it up with a joke of like, you mean I can't just tell them to do as I say, not as I do? We actually have to lead by example. Yeah. But there's so much power in that. And I love that perspective that you have on like leading by example and setting that tone of that we can do it. Because I relate in a huge way to, the fear thing being there, and putting out a book's vulnerable. It's like, and especially from a creative perspective, that we deal with it a lot of the times here at my company with, whether commercials are getting critiqued or ads or whatever. It's like when you're creative, it's very difficult to separate the work from the individual. So putting out a book is vulnerable. It's cool. So I love that, hearing the idea of like setting the standard that this is what we do. We do hard things. We pursue our dreams. We chase big goals. We set aside fear. That's awesome.
Right.
Yeah, leading by example. So why Lion leads with Lion learns, not leads. Lion learns humility. Why humility? What about that? And and don't give away the book. But there's obviously, I think even just by some titles, we can get some of the themes from it. What made you feel like that was an important message to get out there?
Yeah. And you talk about being vulnerable, and that's absolutely the case here. Now here on a podcast with your audience and putting a book out, and it's on Amazon, so I'm open to anybody reviewing it, and they can say whatever they want about my book. And sometimes there's things you can put out there, and you don't have to take it personally because maybe it was a team effort, or this is myself and my illustrator Courtney.
Yeah,
and that's it. And so we're out there, and we're about as vulnerable as it gets. And so, and the next piece. Going into why I touched on humility, and I speak to it a little bit in my description of myself on the book about having a personal code and having values that lend to a personal code, and humility being one of those values. And that is the most personal, bare bones, authentic document I've ever created in my life. Is it's a 1-page personal code that I try to live by and try to pursue every single day. I don't think I'll ever get there where I'm just like, hey, I've done it, but
I don't need this anymore.
I pursue it.
Yeah,
I pursue it every single day. And you can ask me again on my deathbed, and I'll probably just say I'm still in pursuit of it. But
see, but that's sorry, because I want to talk about this more. But those are those things that I admire about you. That intentionality of literally writing down a personal code. I'd love to learn more about that if you're up for it. I'd love to hear the driving why did you feel the need to literally write a personal code? Mm-hmm. And I'd love insight into the personal code too, if you're up for it.
Yeah, I've got a copy right here.
Tell me more about it.
Sure. And so there's 6 values in this personal code, and I chose humility, I think, because I was most excited about it. It felt most tangible because all these ideas had coalesced between this lion who thinks he's the king of the jungle, and he gets humbled through his experiences throughout the course of the book. And I appreciate you mentioning that there's layers to the book. That was certainly intentional.
Yeah, it's one that, just shameless plug, that an adult will enjoy too. That's all I'm going to say. Like there are layers to it for sure. Just wanted to mention that.
Of course, and that was intentional. And that I was thinking, I had the movie Shrek in my mind the whole time, because that movie is a kid's movie, but it has so much directed towards adults, because they know if a kid's watching it, there's a chance there's parents are going to be watching it from the kitchen, from the couch, wherever they are. So they catered it to both audiences. And that was definitely intentional in this book as well, knowing there may or may not be a parent there reading the book, and there's going to be a child reading the book. And so let me cater towards both audiences. So I picked humility because I thought it was most tangible, and I had these ideas that really just came together very quickly. Like I said, those 6 words before I set it down, and I knew that I had something there, and that I could just have fun with it. And working with the animals and the jungle theme, I just knew that it was going to be a fun creative process. The code itself, it's been a long time in the works. It really has. So this was around 2019, 2020. So many things had come together where it stood out that I needed some type of foundational code for myself. And I'm not saying everybody needs this, but for me and my personality, how I view the world and how I think, it seemed necessary. So at the time, in a professional realm, I found myself that I kept saying some of the same things over and over. And I was like, man, I think some of these things are important because I keep coming back to them. I keep saying them. But I'd also forget some. And then a situation would come up and I'd be like, there it is. There's that thing. How do I keep a hold on these critical things that I keep referencing? Because obviously they're important, and obviously I reference them a lot, and they come up a lot in my personal, professional life. And so that was ruminating in the back of my mind. My organization that I worked for, that I still work for, Plata County, at the time was also going through a change of revamping their organizational values, and they're scrapping the old ones. They had put out a survey to all county employees asking them to rank what they thought were the most important values. And I started thinking, if an organization puts so much emphasis on its values, on a mission statement, on a vision statement, why don't we as people, why don't we as individuals? If this is guidance for an organization, for a group of people, why wouldn't it also work for a single person? I had that in the back of my mind too. I was also taking an online personal leadership development course called Compete to Create, created by Pete Carroll, former head coach of the Seattle Seahawks, and then the sports psychologist for the Seattle Seahawks at the time as well.
Oh, I bet that's awesome.
It was a great course. Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if it's still out there, but certainly recommend it. And there was a whole thing about, personal code and identifying your mission statement. And for example, they threw out their mission statements. Pete Carroll's was always compete. 2 words, as simple as that, but that's Pete Carroll's personal mission statement, always compete. And so this class had you work on developing your personal mission statement as well, which is also encompassed in the code that I've got here. So it was, these things that kept coming up, and then it was this emphasis on organizations and having these values, and then this course saying, hey, have a personal code, have a mission statement. I had also just finished Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and habit number I think habit number 2, begin with the end in mind, talks about developing a personal code, developing these values you can always fall back on, developing a mission statement. And I just started seeing it all over the place. It was kind of confirmation bias at that point, where I was just like looking for it and I was finding it. I was reading Extreme Motorship by Jocko Willink and Leif Babin. And it's very clear when you listen to enough Jocko Willink via podcast or in his books or TED Talks or whatever, he has these core values, discipline equals freedom, extreme ownership, the 4 laws of combat, wake up before the enemy. Like, that's his personal code, and that keeps him grounded. And I just kept seeing it, and I was like, I need this. I need this. And it started this huge process of sitting down, and I wrote out, I knew what I wanted to have. I wanted it to fit on one page because that's just my preference. I want it on one page. I want to be able to see it in one page. I don't want to have to flip through an entire pamphlet to identify what I see as important in this world.
Right.
And so that was first. And then it was also these quotes that really spoke to me. And so I had a list of every quote that was meaningful to me that I could attach to a certain value. And then I had a list of every value that I thought was important. And it was 50 plus values. And I listed them all out. And then I started process of elimination of, okay, this is more important than this one. I'm going to keep this one. These are pretty close. This one's more meaningful. I'm going to go with this one. I got it down to 10. And that was my initial concept of a code. I had a mission statement at the top. I had these 10 values, and I had this. That's essentially what it was at the time. And that was roughly 2020. And I've continued to hone it since then and develop it, and I've shaped it and molded it over and over, including I looked at it 2 weeks ago in preparation for this and to make sure, hey, 2024, does this still accurately reflect what I want it to show? And I did update it.
Yeah.
And now it's down to 6 values, and maybe one day it'll get down to 4 or 3, but it's down to 6. I've got a mission statement at the top. I've got the 6 values. I have my active statement attached to that value saying this is what I will do. And then I have a quote that I think is meaningful attached to each value. And at the end, I have a motto because I just broke it up that way.
Yeah.
And that's it. And so it's on a single page. And it's, like I said, it's the most important and personal document I've ever made. And never was it my intention to make this public or to get it out there. The reason I tied in humility and the other values is because I wanted my kids to get a leg up on some of this stuff that I felt was important for them to learn.
Right.
And through the course of my life, I've learned that I usually didn't learn it until I made the mistake or I experienced it firsthand, and then I look back and I'm like, oh, that's what my parents were talking to me about. But that's fine. My son and my daughter will do the same thing, and then they can look back on these books and all this stuff that I'm doing here, and they say, that's what Dad was talking about.
Right.
And that's fine. That's the best way to learn, is that direct experience. But this is it. And, so at the bottom, I've got a signature, and I sign it every time I create a new one. And that's my commitment of saying, this is what I'm going to continue to work on. And this isn't meant to reflect of, ho-hum, this is me, look at me on my pedestal. I've got a lot of self-work to do. But ideally, if I can continue to pursue this mission statement, this motto, these 6 values every single day until the day that I'm gone, hopefully by the end, I'll continue to be a better person.
Yeah, I love that. And that is so, I talked about, like, I've sensed intentionality from you forever. Like I said, I feel like I know you well. And I've sensed that there was this, like, methodical intentionality behind your life. I had no idea that it was at this level. But I think that that's remarkable because it speaks to who you truly are. Like, obviously the values, and I would love to, at least briefly go over them if you're up for it and dive in a little bit. But just the act of doing it is insightful to, your approach to life and, like, who you want to be and those things like that. Maybe I'm experiencing a little confirmation bias now too, but it really is. I'm smiling because it's fun for me to see the things that I've assumed. Like I've known that you've had this methodical intentionality. I'm not even that surprised that it's lists, sure. Like your personality showing, but to also understand the work that went into even creating the personal mission statement and these philosophies and things like that. it just speaks to the effort that's behind it too. And I don't know if you know this or not, but you talked about Jocko Willink. Years ago, you gave me a shirt from him that says "good" on the front, and I still wear it often. And I think about you every time I put it on. So, and those little things that like you look back in hindsight, and it's like, yeah, that makes so much sense. This makes so much sense now. And I also think it's admirable and, you know, courageous to share that, because I think most people want to be the best versions of themselves that we can be, generally speaking. And maybe I've got, you know, some biases because of my spheres of influence and these things like that. Rarely, though, are we vulnerable enough to say, like, I'm putting in the work this way. Like, this is how I'm holding myself accountable. These are the things that, you know, I'm doing to make sure that I stay on track. And when you take away the vulnerability and the fear and, you know, the nuance of it, what a no-brainer of an exercise, you know, like that, of how it almost makes it feel simple in a very great way. I mean, like I'm gonna list these things. I'm gonna analyze what's valuable in my life. I'm gonna prioritize them. I'm gonna hold myself accountable. I mean, I even love the fact that when you were talking about writing the book, you set your own deadlines. Yep. Like there were deadlines that you made, but you knew that would trigger activity and
deadlines for action,
and excitement. Yeah. So it's cool because we all have different personalities, and everybody has. The better we get to know ourselves, the better we can set up these parameters to make sure that we, you know, live within them. Yeah. Like, you know, I was telling you off camera that I haven't had a drop of alcohol in over a year, and it's because I operate better that way. Not that I ever had a problem with it or anything like that. It's just that it increases the likelihood of me being the version of me that I want to be.
There you go.
You know?
Sure.
And like, so sometimes I think being vulnerable about sharing this stuff, people can think like, oh, they have a problem, or like, oh, they're, you know, working on these things or whatever, but it's the exact opposite. It's like, I'm going to put these parameters in place to increase the likelihood of success of me being who I want to be. Will you humor me? Humility, I know, is on there. I would love to hear the other 5 and why. You know, why? Sure. And let's start with humility. Why is humility so important? Why is it important to you, you know, personally?
Yeah. No, great question. Happy to share all of them.
As long as you're okay with it.
Of course, cool. Yeah. I'll be out here on a ledge, but one of the values is authenticity, and so it holds me accountable to be authentic with you right now. And like I said, this was never meant to be a public document. It was never meant to go beyond my eyes and my wife's. You know, I've got a copy in my office at work that's right behind my monitors, so it's always right there in my, you know, my peripheral, holding me accountable. I have a copy on the wall at my house that's in my office there where I work and where I do the writing and some of the other stuff that I do, also holding me accountable. And it's there for me. It's my document. I'm not saying that it works for everybody and that it's, you know, everybody should do it, but it's what works for me. Yeah. It's been beneficial. So, you know, humility in particular, I started with in the book because it seemed like the most approachable. I had the ideas that really came together. I find it critical because often through my own experience, I find that when I make a lot of mistakes when I'm ego-driven. When I'm ego-driven is when I feel like I need to justify what I'm doing. When I'm ego-driven, I feel like I need to boast about how I do things or the knowledge that I have or the skills that I have, when it's not necessary, because if you genuinely have that knowledge and skills, it's going to show in your actions and what you do. Talking about it is just a means of trying to appease your ego. And so often it's just mistakes through ego and listening to my ego of, you know, I've got to do this and, you know, this to appease my ego. And there's also, I didn't realize it in the moment, but there's a ton of stoicism tied into this code as well, all over it. And humility, certainly one of those elements tied to stoicism. And, you know, in the book, you'll see there's a quote attributed, and it's the quote that I pulled directly from the quote I have associated with humility in the code here, and it's from Bruce Lee, and it says, the usefulness of a cup is in its emptiness. And I don't know if anybody's outright identified Bruce Lee as a Stoic, but I certainly think he is. His principles were very much in line with, you know, the ancient Stoics of Greece and so forth. But the thought of, and I think people can take quotes different ways, but I see the quote of the usefulness of a cup is in its emptiness, of almost like the emptiness of a mind, the openness of a mind, of if you think you know everything, And there's nothing more for you to learn than you're right, because you're not going to be able to receive anymore, because your cup is full, you know it's full, and you're not willing to receive anymore. But if you know your cup is empty, you know you have more to learn, you know you have more to grow, then you're going to receive that information. You're going to continue to grow. And so a cup, your mind, yourself, your approach to life is most useful when it's empty, because it allows you to continue to pursue things.
Love that. Love that. Yeah. The usefulness of a cup is in its emptiness. Yeah, that's profound if you think about it, for sure. Yeah, and I love the idea of like operating with humility as a baseline, you know, like being aware of how little we do know. It kind of reminds me of that, the time confidence chart, the experience versus confidence chart. You know, right at the beginning we have unrealistic confidence levels, you know, as it relates to our experience. And as experience grows, usually confidence kind of drops because we realize how little we know.
Sure.
Like we realize how much we have to learn, and
right.
You know, I mean, it takes a little bit of experience to get there. But anyway, I love that. I love it. And that's again where there are some layers. There are some layers in this book with these things of like how the lion kind of views the other animals early on, and then after some experiences, he has a different view
right.
on those other animals. And I think that's it translates to so many different things in life about like how we view other people. I recently have had quite a bit of a journey with my business partner. She's amazing. You guys would get along great. We have different skill sets, different personalities. And there was a long time there where I was trying to like look at what I was measuring was unfair. It's like, you know, my person. And then when I took the peeled it all back, when I got humble, I realized like, you know, first of all, I don't want another me. That would be a disaster, you know, in the business. And I don't know, it's just very similar to how like, you know, you see the lion sees the other animals with their other, I'm just going to call it talents, or, you know, the other attributes that they have, and realizes how useful they are and how unique they are and things like that. And applying that to how we view other human beings and, you know, other world situations and things like that. It's just it's a healthy way to view things because it takes the blinders off. You know, it lets us be kind of open to
right.
what we put value on, you know, what we perceive as like better or worse or anything like that. So anyway, I love that. The usefulness of a cup is in its emptiness.
Yeah.
That's great.
And we've talked about Jocko a couple times. He's been a huge influence on me over the last, you know, since he came out, I think in 2017 on the Tim Ferriss podcast, and then he blew up from there. But he always emphasized his humility.
I messaged him to be on my podcast. He didn't message back. But I shot my shot. I'm going to keep trying.
Why not?
So Jocko, when you're hearing this, come on my podcast. No, I'm kidding.
Come on. Yep.
But
you're influencing us, and we appreciate you. But he emphasizes humility a lot. And I also read a book by Ryan Holiday, who's a modern Stoic and, you know, former wonderkin kind of, and a marketing guru, and then who really moved into being a prominent author and a modern day Stoic. And he has a book called Ego is the Enemy, and talks about the importance of humility. And he takes these ancient Stoic philosophies and beliefs, and he ties them to modern day events, modern day personalities and people, and ties them together to the significant event of this is what happened with this president where his ego got in the way, and here's what he learned from it, and here's how he approaches it now, and here's how it's tied to this ancient Stoic philosophy. And he really consolidates it and ties together so well. It's one of three. It's the Stoic trilogy. There's Ego is the Enemy, The Obstacle is the Way, and Stillness is the Key. I recommend all three of them. But
The Obstacle is the Way I'm familiar with. I wasn't familiar with
that one's phenomenal as well. But he calls it the Stoic trilogy. But
yeah.
Anyways, through that as well, it was like humility stands up huge. Like this has certainly got to be in there.
Yeah.
So that's one of six. I don't know if they're in ranked order, but if I could have one of six, it would be integrity. That's at the lists. And if I had to drop everyone and say this is the one, it's integrity. And I've said it to my coworkers and everybody else that as long as what you're doing is done with integrity, I'm okay with it. If you mess up, if we lose this thing, if we lose this money, if we lose this client, if this goes south, the first thing I'm going to ask you was, did you do it with integrity? Where was your intention? And if you did it with integrity, I'm going to defend you till the end.
Yeah.
And the other stuff can be repaired. We can get it back sometime. If you didn't, then that's a hard stop. Like we're done at that point.
Right.
There's nothing else I can defend. You're going to be on your own. And then I try to hold myself to that standard too. And I certainly falter quite a bit, but it's always at the top of the mind. If you do things the right way, the rest is going to fall into place.
Yeah.
And it's got to be done with integrity.
I have a core memory. It's interesting how, like the things we pick up from our fathers and stuff like that, but I have a core memory of mine. We were going to a campsite or a national park or something. It was just one of, whatever, like a day use area. And it's one of those like self-pay stations,
Okay.
Of like you fill it out and put the cash in
Sure.
and, write your thing. And I remember I was young and I remember asking my dad, like, why don't we just go in? Like no big deal. And I'll never forget, he said, because my integrity is worth more than the $10. I was like, woof. So that was interesting, like those little moments and those little, when integrity comes to fruition, above all things, that was just one of those that stuck with me so much. And I really couldn't agree more in terms of if you had to strip it all down to one, I think our integrity is probably the most important thing, that we have. It's also one of the, maybe not one of, but it's something that nobody can take from us too, which I like about, integrity. Like we can always maintain our own integrity regardless of outside influence or outside situation. That's like maybe not the one, but it's one thing that we always have control over, integrity. So I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In a sense, at the end of the day, all you have is your word. And if it's compromised because you lack integrity, then you don't have anything left.
Yeah. What's the quote that you have that goes with integrity?
I just updated it. It's from Marcus Aurelius, probably the most prominent Stoic out there. But the quote is, "Cultivate a robust character that endures, unfazed by the winds of change, rooted in principles and integrity." And I loved that one because my active statement for this one was build unwavering character. And then here's Marcus Aurelius saying, cultivate a robust character. Mm-hmm. And like I hadn't read this quote before I put that up there. But I saw the quote and I was like, that's got to be there. That's perfect. That's exactly what I'm going for. And you talk about Marcus Aurelius, like at one point the most powerful person in the entire world. His Roman Empire basically spanned the entire known world at that time. I talk about somebody who it was so critical for him to maintain humility and integrity.
Yeah.
And who did, and by all accounts was an incredible leader and kept himself humble, maintained great integrity. And again, along the lines of, learning Stoicism, he's got it's not a book, but it's going to consolidate it into a book called Meditations. But it's phenomenal because it was never meant to be a book. It's a collection of his private journal entries that were just meant for him.
That
were found and then translated from Greek into various languages and consolidated into a book. And so it's him talking to himself.
Yeah, what an important point with that. Yeah.
Yeah, because when you're putting something out there, you might change things a little bit. You might modify it to make it reflect more positively on you.
Or like this one's a little fringe, I'll hold that back a little.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. These are bare bones
for
him talking to himself as the most powerful person in the entire world.
Fascinating.
And it's a tough read. It's not like a start to finish and I'm done. It's like read a couple pages and try to digest what you just read.
Right.
Because it's written, in the language you're most comfortable with, but it doesn't mean you're going to, be able to receive it right away.
Yeah.
It takes several iterations to be able to get it.
Right. Love that. Yeah. What's next on the list?
Authenticity is next, according to the list there, and we talked about that a little bit. Being authentic. Just the action statement is be true to myself, and just being true to myself. And I think a lot of this comes down to self-acceptance for me personally, which dealt with forever and we'll continue to deal with. Self-acceptance of if I'm being inauthentic, it's probably because I'm not accepting myself. And so I'm trying to present myself differently to other people because of my insecurities.
Yeah.
But if I'm able to be authentic, then other people can really recognize who I am and they can see who I am. And I can just be myself. And if they can't receive that, then that's okay. Then, you're not supposed to jive with everybody. Not everybody's going to get along in the same way. But if they do, they're accepting my true self.
Yeah.
If they accept someone I'm trying to be, then they're accepting a false self. And I'm not,
which is probably not fair to either party.
That's right.
Yeah, and that what I love about authenticity and like being our true self is it's the easiest thing to do. You know, like when we get to just be our core selves and like not try to be, you know, somebody that we're not, or like fake social norms, or like, could you imagine if you tried to be an extrovert, or if I tried to be an introvert?
Disaster.
You know, like
Yeah.
if we tried to reverse roles, we'd be exhausted.
It
You
would.
know, it would be, and then the relationships we would build on that would be inauthentic because it would be based on a foundation, you know, that is not integrity backed. But I love that because I've found where I've seen it a lot actually is in business. Early on, we tried to, you know, accommodate everybody. I needed the money. Like we were like, yeah, we can do that. Yeah, we can do that. And then, you know, it doesn't work. We're not that good at that. Or, you know, this is out of our wheelhouse or whatever. And when we were like, no, this is our core competency. Like this is what we are great at.
There you go.
Let's see if it's a fit. The relationships are better. I mean, you know, I think with marriage and relationships and business and stuff like that, because then the trickle effect becomes significant because when you're authentic to yourself, you create authentic relationships. Yep. And when you create authentic relationships, you create an authentic community. And, you know, it's like you were saying how different you and I are, yet we're good friends.
Right.
And, you know, it's on this foundation of respect and things like that. And I would argue that it's because it's authentic. You know, like there's these real connections that happen. When you're authentic with yourself, you open yourself up to the possibility, at least, of authentic relationships and communities and things like that. So I love it. I subscribe to that in a huge way.
Absolutely.
Like, if you don't like me, you know, that's okay. You know, like we don't need to pretend because the authenticity's, you know, and there's energy expenditure too. You know, you can. You know, anybody listening, there's those relationships in life where it's like, that takes energy to do that one. You're like, that one is kind of draining, you know, or like I leave there and I feel a little bit worn out or whatever. The relationships in my life, you know, I think about when we come and ride in your guys' arena or, you know, when we come and hang out with you guys, it's easy. And you leave there like, that was fun. You know, that's kind of filled us back up. Those are the benefits of those authentic relationships. So anyway, I love that.
Absolutely, for sure. And we've had some experiences where it really stripped us down and you couldn't be anything but authentic, right? It's hard to be authentic when you're providing CPR, who's somebody who's in cardiac arrest. It's hard to be authentic when you're holding a fire hose inside of a burning house. And so through those experiences, it also stripped us down where you couldn't be inauthentic.
There's no choice.
Yeah. There's no room for that.
Yeah, what a good point too. Doug, the conversation last week was telling me that relationships are forged through shared experiences. Yeah. And I think to your point, those shared experiences sort of force authenticity. You know, like we had no extra energy to be anybody other than who we were.
That's right.
You know, we're out fighting a wildland fire or, you know, doing CPR like you said. So yeah, those experiences force it, which I think is cool because then it makes for meaningful relationships. Yeah. What's the quote you have with authenticity? Or that's the one you just read?
No, I just read.
No, yeah, you're right.
Integrity. So for authenticity, it's by Mark Twain. It's a man can't be comfortable without his own approval.
Yeah, love it.
And it's as simple as that. You know, if you're constantly trying to present yourself differently, it's exhausting.
Yeah.
And you're not comfortable, and you have this facade that you're trying to live with, and you know, and I know this through personal experience again because. You know, either through a lack of confidence or whatever it is, where I try to present myself differently, or, you know, knowing who I am, I'm like, wow, who's gonna appreciate this quiet, reserved, stoic personality? And I don't smile a lot, and people love people who smile. So let me try this, and it was always just exhausting, and it came off as inauthentic and awkward, and I think people can sense it. People can feel it when someone's being inauthentic.
For sure,
you can sense it. There's something there, even if they don't outright tell you. You can sense it and you know that something's off.
Yeah.
And I found that to be the case a lot. And it was just like, I've got to focus on this and be more authentic in every way I present myself and just be true to myself.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. And I think we all need to be, you know, the authenticity's, it's a superpower.
Yeah, it sure is. Yeah. Next value is discipline. Again, going back to, you know, Jocko,
discipline,
he's very strong.
Freedom.
That's right. Yeah. But, and, you know, the original quote is attributed to Aristotle: with discipline comes freedom. And so that's the quote I have here. I don't know if that's where he got it, either consciously or subconsciously, but yeah, Aristotle has, a quote of "with discipline comes freedom."
Interesting.
I think Jocko consolidated it in a sense that makes sense for him, which is perfect, right?
Yeah.
He's done his own work
1
very
+
clearly.
1 = 2.
Yeah. And discipline. And my action statement is make small daily improvements. Kind of this 1% better mentality. It doesn't have to be a huge jump from day to day, but if you can try to get 1% better every single day, you're going to be okay. And this came out most prominently, so as the risk manager for the Plata County, I was really called to serve when the pandemic came around and the community was asked to stand up a COVID-19 testing site. And at that point, our public health department was doing it, but they were lacking resources and didn't have the personnel. And so they called upon the county and said, hey, we need you to run a testing site. And I got the call and said, hey, you're leading the testing site. And we jumped in there, and our team was phenomenal. And it was really just a mindset of, we know we're going to stumble. We know none of us know what we're doing. None of us are public health professionals, but we're going to do the best we can. And every day we're going to strive to get 1% better.
Yeah.
And by the time we were done, that incremental 1% improvement day over day after having a testing site open for 3.5, 4 months, we were, years ahead of where we were when we first opened up.
That's amazing. Yeah. And how cool that you were able to translate those values, in your leadership role professionally, and in a way that was, adopted, and you had buy-in, and, that everybody did it, especially at a time of so much uncertainty, like all of that stuff, and to be able to kind of like rally people and, be disciplined in that nature. I love that. That's awesome.
Yeah. And it was a huge achievement. We walked away not having a single injury, not having a single incidental positive test or exposure or, anything.
Right.
And it was because we took that very strategic approach to just continuous improvement.
Yeah. Well, and I love the whole discipline. What is the Aristotle quote? With discipline comes freedom.
Correct.
Yeah. I love that because on the surface, it's so counterintuitive. Like, you think that discipline is a cage, it like blocks you into this thing.
Right.
But I've seen in my life, my discipline with my physical fitness has given me physical freedom.
Right.
Like I love the fact that I can just on a whim, I'm running a 50K this weekend. It's because I've been disciplined for years. It's not because I'm crazy and doing it. It's because I've been putting in the work, and I get to do it. Financial discipline equals financial freedom.
That's right.
All of these things. And that took me some practice to wrap my head around, because sometimes it felt almost like I don't know. It feels counterintuitive until you see it come to fruition. Yeah. And I think the important caveat with that, with discipline comes freedom, quote or statement, is that it's with a longer time horizon.
Yeah.
It's not today. Like investing your money today is not going to create financial freedom today. In fact, it's going to create financial restrictions.
Sure.
But, you change the time horizon, in your case with like the testing centers, being disciplined isn't going to make us perfect today, but it's going to improve us for the next, months or however long we're doing this. And which has just helped me with my perspective on that of like, I've got to look at it from a bigger picture, like being disciplined with my money is not fun today, but it's going to be a lot of fun in a few years,
right.
That's
it. Yeah. This concept of discipline begets discipline. If you're able to be disciplined in this one area of your life, maybe you can expand it to other areas of your life. Or if you're able to wake up early, then, hey, now you have a little more time to do this. And does that, if you work out in the morning, does that then lead you to feeling better and you don't have to do it after work? And now you have more time after work to see your kids. And
right.
Discipline begets discipline. And inverse is also true. The lack thereof begets the lack of discipline as well.
Right.
And it can go both ways.
Yeah. I love it. I subscribe to discipline in a huge way.
Yeah. And you think you're boxing yourself in, giving these parameters, and you're eliminating flexibility, and that's not necessarily the case. It's just a matter of being disciplined with what's important and allowing yourself to be flexible in other areas.
Right. Yeah. Love it.
Yeah.
What's next? I'm eating this up.
Yeah, sure. Next one is simplicity. Probably the one I have the most trouble with, especially with the written word.
Coming from the list guy?
Yes, coming from me, simplicity. And that's why it's there. It's because, again, this is stuff I'm pursuing. It's not stuff that I do regularly. It's stuff that I'm pursuing. And it came down to simplicity of...
I'm surprised about simplicity, so I'm excited to hear about this.
Okay, sure. Just a matter of, my action statement is minimize distractions. And, definitely in the professional world, minimizing those distractions. And you talked about identifying your core competencies and being able to say no to clients, right? You're minimizing those distractions and you're not pleasing everybody. You're identifying what your core competencies are. You're giving the best service to your core clients. And that also lends to, the 80-20 principle of, 20% of your clients are going to give you 80% of your return. So if you invest your effort in a very focused way on these highest return clients and give them the best service possible, it's actually going to benefit you in general.
And it does simplify it.
Right. And you're simplifying it because hey, these are the clients and we're going to give them most dedicated service versus everybody's a potential client and we're going to do everything and say yes, left and right, And for me, it's simplifying, what I do professionally is it juxtaposes so sharply against this creative outlet of writing a children's book. I'm a risk manager by profession. It's insurance, it's OSHA compliance, it's inspections, it's safety, it's security, it's all this stuff. It's a ton of policy and procedure review. It's a ton of technical writing, and so I do technical writing and I review legal documents and I'm reading legal jargon all the time. And it's
far from simple.
Correct. Yeah, it's very structured and I tend to be too wordy and I tend to say too much, either in a text or in an email, and I have to go through it again and remember, I got to break this down. And I think the first inkling of it came from first reading an autobiography on, a biography on Abe Lincoln and his emphasis on simplicity. And then also, learning from some mentors locally. And you think about like I can't remember whether it's, one of his famous speeches is 2 minutes and 14 seconds. And everybody remembers it. But that same day, somebody else went first, and that was the more prominent speaker at the time, and that speaker went like 45 minutes, and nobody remembers it.
Oh, fascinating.
Because it was just too much. It was too much, And so simplifying what you're saying, simplifying what I'm saying, simplifying what I'm putting on paper, what I'm putting into an email, simplifying my life too,
Yeah.
I also got in this rat race of constant self-improvement, and I got to listen to this next podcast and this next podcast and go, continue to grow, continue to develop. I got to read these books, and now I'm on Amazon and here's this book referral. I got to read this, and my lists were building up. And I was just so focused on going from one thing to the next that I wasn't actually digesting the material and putting it in practical application. And I was like, let me simplify. So I did this as well. And I said, I'm going to identify the 5 most important books I've read in the last 10 years. And those are the 5 books I'm going to focus on for the next several years. And I'm just going to practice doing the principles in those books. And that's it. And maybe when I get bored and when I get tired of reading them over and over, I'll read some other ones here and there, but I'm not going to take them too seriously. I'm just going to read them for the fun of it.
Yeah.
But I'm going to stick with these 5 books. And so that's what I did. I simplified and said, here's my 5 books. And if I'm going to learn anything, it's going to come from these 5 books. And that's it. And so it applies to so much. And it's the one I have to work on the most.
And probably, that's probably just, most people probably need to work on that just because of the world that we're living. We live in such a complex bombardment world. I read a study a while back, I'm going to butcher it, but the gist of it was that kids with less toys are happier than kids with more toys. They appreciate the toys more, they play with them more in depth, they're more meaningful to them. And I think that speaks to that idea of simplicity. There was a while back, it's funny because I'm not like your, Pottery Barn home decorator guy, I don't have, but my wife and I I think it was at a farmer's market or something. And there's this cute little wooden sign, and it says that love grows best in in little houses like this, or whatever it was. And it almost brought me to tears because I was like, oh, so we bought it and we hung it up. But because to me, what it means is we don't need the other stuff. We need what we already have. We've got it. And it's a lot of kind of tying into those, looking backwards on our goals and these things like that. It's sometimes this constant pursuit of more is detrimental. Mm-hmm. I think about my happiest times with my family. It's usually when I'm camping or doing something, after this, I'm all excited. I'm taking the kids crawfishing at Pewitt. We're going to go catch some crawfish so we can cook them up tomorrow.
Nice.
And it's going to be great. We're going to do a whole lot of nothing, and throw out their stuff. And anyway, there's beauty in simplicity. Mm-hmm. We went camping in Moab the other day. I've talked about it on the show a few times, and we didn't have cell phone service. And it was life-changing. We remove these noise, we remove this these distractions, this pressure, this messaging that we're fed, these obligations and these pressures and whatever.
That's it.
And it just feels right.
Yeah.
There's power in simplicity. I was surprised that was on your list, but now that I'm digesting that, it makes so much sense. Like simplicity is beautiful. There's nothing better than simplicity, really.
Right.
Yeah.
It allows you to focus and really dial in and identify what's most important, what you really want to, where you want to spend your time and your energy. One of the most beneficial things I've picked up personally in the last several years is meditation, and it's so simple.
Yeah.
And I think modern day we try to make it a little more complicated of, here's this app, and hey, listen to these ones on Mondays and then this one on Wednesday. And
yeah, it's so true.
You don't even need that. You don't need anything. And it's free. You don't have to pay for anything. You just need 10 minutes.
Right.
And somewhere to sit. And that's it. And it's so simple, but the benefits are enormous. And also as a dad, and I just overthink things. If it's not apparent to your entire audience by now, and I know it's apparent to you, I overthink things. And so as a father, I was, even getting ready for my son and trying to identify, okay, I'm going to do this, this, and this. And okay, I got to remember these principles. And I had complicated it so much, and I'm trying to remember, okay, yep, this, and this. And my son was born, and this doctor came into the room, and I think he could see it on my face, and maybe even the words that I was saying at the time. But here's this MD who comes, and I don't remember if he even put his hand on my shoulder or not, but he looked at me, he said, hey, make sure you keep your kid fed, clean, warm, and loved, and the rest will take care of itself.
Oh, simplicity.
And it was like the weight had fallen off my shoulders of what it meant to be a dad. And I was like, those 4 one-word things is all I have to do? And I don't remember his face, and he walked away. He wasn't even one of our primary providers at the time. But that was it, and I've kept that with me since then.
Yeah.
And anytime I mess up, and anytime I'm like, man, I'm struggling as a father, what do I need to do now? Okay, are my kids fed, clean, warm, and loved? And it's so simple, but it's effective for me.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
What's next?
Courage is the last one. Courage. So my action statement is take chances.
Coming on podcasts?
Coming on podcasts, putting myself out to the world by writing a book. That's it. Courage, take chances. The quote associated is Teddy Roosevelt's "Man in the Arena" quote. And the part I took is the credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena. And I know a lot of these quotes are gender-oriented, but they obviously apply regardless, male, female. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred with dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again because there is no effort without error and shortcoming. And I missed the quote for simplicity, but it's attributed to William James, and it says, the art of being wise is the art of knowing what to overlook.
Yeah, I love that too. On the courage quote there, I've been listening to a new to me at least musician named Dylan Gossett, and his music's great, but his writing I'm like obsessed with. Like just so you know, I have an affinity for a good writer. So like, but I've liked you before. Now I really like you, but he's got a line in one of his songs that basically says, "Sweat on your brow is better than regret in your heart." It's like, and I've always had that idea of, it's easy to criticize the executor. Like my podcast is far from perfect. My business is far from perfect. I'm sure the book is far from perfect. Like we have all these things, but we have the courage to try. And I think it's such a good trait, of like trying and being courageous and things like that. And what a great thing to kind of put out there and strive for, because, being able to pass that down and lead by example, like you were saying with your kids, right. We need more, courageous individuals, because that's where change gets made too. When we're willing to try new things or go out of the comfort zone or whatever it might be. So tell me, because I know, and at the back of this book, you kind of, it alludes to this, and this is why we're here, just so everybody listening. At the back of the book, it talks about, your personal code, mm-hmm. And that this is one of 6.
Correct.
Are we expecting a series of books? Are they, is this all, have you written them yet? Are they in the works? Well, I'm just fascinated with, because sure. I just want to share how cool I think this is, because it's an evergreen way for you to pass on these core values of yours to not only your kids, obviously the world, but, your grandkids and your great grandkids and these things like that, that like it's got some permanence with it that is cool. I like to think sometimes that, my podcast is a version of that like when I'm dead and gone and, hopefully that's in 100 years, but that there's some, record of it. Like people can go back and get some insight and like learn who I was. And I feel like this is an example of that, with the books. Are the others written? Like, do you already have a framework of, are they written?
Yeah. So, and I put that out there so that there was context and so that people understood how personal this element was to me, that it wasn't just a random choice of, oh, this sounds like a catchy title.
Right.
So it wasn't like, oh, look at me, I have this code that I live by. Aren't I so great? It was really just giving context to the reader of why did this author choose this topic? And what does it have to do with him as an individual? And that's why it's there. It wasn't a matter of just putting it out there. But yeah, of course, I've got 6 other books in the hopper, 5 being the other values, working through them. Whether it's a series told from a different animal's perspective or what that looks like, it's still to be fleshed out. I've got the core concepts of some of the other values, and I'm really excited for that. There's one that did jump to the front of the list, though, and it is my very next book. And I've got several stanzas written for it already, but the title is The Lost Ambulance. And it comes from where else but my kids. My kids and I love Matt Carney. He's a musician. I love listening to his music. I've got all of his albums since, dating back to 2002, 2004, in his early days. But I listen to it with my kids because he has clean lyrics, so it's an easy choice when listening to kids. Some great songs, a huge variety of tempo, and he's just a phenomenal artist. And he's been doing it for a long time, obviously 20 or so years. And he has a song called Los Angeles. And my son doesn't know what Los Angeles is. He's never been there. He doesn't know that it's a city in California. So when we first listened to it, when he was around 3, he interpreted it as Lost Ambulance. And my wife and I, we weren't going to correct him. Like, it was too adorable to correct. We're just like, this is forever what the song is now. It is now Lost Ambulance. But then it hit me. It was like, that's a great children's book title.
Yeah.
And so I've fleshed it out. And like I said, I'm, working through the manuscript right now for The Lost Ambulance. And it's also personal in a note that, we're first responders either currently or at one point in time, whether it's through EMT or firefighting. And, I've worked campus security and corrections and things more on the law enforcement side of things, been a defensive tactics instructor and, been in that world. And I have a huge amount of respect and appreciation for first responders and dispatchers who often get overlooked, but that is a tough job as well. And so it's really just a love letter to first responders. And the intent, if I can execute it correctly, is to make sure that 100% of the proceeds from the book go to a nonprofit that supports first responders.
Awesome.
So, locally we have the Durango 100 Club where they support first responders in La Plata County, help send kids through scholarships by providing send kids through school by providing scholarships, mostly kids whose parents are either first responders or who have lost parents through the service of being a first responder. And they also help first responders when a house burns down or they have some type of tragic incident, either through the course of the job or through the course of their personal lives, helping them get back on their feet because all they do is help the rest of us as a community. And so the intent is to partner with a nonprofit and have 100% of the proceeds go toward that nonprofit. And again, just be a love letter towards first responders and dispatchers and thank them for the service they provide. And I don't know if it's ever been more difficult, especially law enforcement, to work in that field these days with, certain public perceptions and certain legislation. And it's just tough. And, in some of those cases, they have to make a life or death decision in half a second. And then there's a committee of people who play armchair quarterback the following week and they watch it in slow motion 100 times over and then they make a decision.
Right.
And it's just not equitable. It's not the same. But in all aspects, all first responders, whether it's medical, fire, law enforcement, and again, dispatchers, just huge respect for them and what they've done. And it's been a pleasure being shoulder to shoulder with them in some capacity, even now as a risk manager. So that's the intent of the next book, The Lost Ambulance.
I can't wait. Darren, thank you so much for coming on here. But on a larger and more sincere level, thank you for being you. Thank you for being humble. Thank you for being authentic. Thank you for being courageous. Thank you for having discipline. I'm going to forget all of them, but so sincerely, I want you to know, you make a huge impact on me, and you do inspire by example. That's why I gave you one of those shirts, and I don't give them away. Usually they're for, people that have been on the show, but I wanted you to have one because I've so thoroughly enjoyed getting to know you. And, I'm joking, but seriously about peeling back some of those layers. It's so fun to get some insight, and even today, some more in-depth insight into who you are. I think the world needs, more intentionality that you bring to the table. And I just want to thank you I know how out of your comfort zone it is to share this, and, how vulnerable and authentic it is. But I also need you to know that it matters. And so I just want to sincerely thank you for it, because it makes an impact, and you're leading by example, and you're setting the tone. You're showing not only your kids, but other people, that this is what we can do. You're normalizing these things, and it's hugely, hugely, hugely impactful. For anybody listening, the book is seriously worth a read. It's not just like this shameless promo, conversation that Darren and I are having, and I'll make sure to link it, in our show notes here at the end. But I just want to wrap with that how much I appreciate it. Keep doing what you're doing. You need to know how impactful it is, and that it really is making a difference. So I'm just glad to know you, and I really appreciate it.
Same here, and thank you so much for having me on here. And again, like I said, it's been a pleasure watching you grow as a podcaster. And I do have a request from me, and probably also from the public at large too. But after your 50-mile ultramarathon, you did a solo cast where you delved into your personal experience from that. And I know for the 100-mile Buffalo run, you did the tandem podcast with your wife, but it was mostly shining the spotlight on her and what her role was and what her experiences were as someone supporting someone running. I need a solo cast from you regarding the Buffalo run.
You're going to make me be authentic and vulnerable?
That's it.
Okay.
I need that solo cast regarding the Buffalo run, because
Fair.
I'm fascinated by the mindset of somebody who is willing to do that and willing to see it through and across that finish line with 2 fractured legs and toenails that are splitting off from your feet, and later on receiving 2 IVs and not even waking up and not even knowing when the needle goes in your hand or wherever they placed it.
That's the nudge I need.
There you go.
I will do that. I've been nervous about it, so
Sure.
I will do that.
No, there was some gems, as far as takeaways from the first one, is, whether it's if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together, or, put yourself outside your comfort zone. I'm sure there's just as many good takeaways from this one. I need a Buffalo Run solo cast. And then also, if you had time to reflect on it, whether you say it here or you save it for another time, maybe even the solo cast, I'd love to know, what a Ben Sorensen code would look like. If even just top of mind, what values come to mind and what reflects the core values of Ben Sorensen, and what would be down on your code, and what your mission statement might look like. And when you're 74 miles into a race, knowing that you have an entire marathon left, what is that mantra you say in your head? What is that thought that you repeat over and over that keeps you going when you're at that critical apex?
I will.
I'd love to know that as well.
I love that. I appreciate that challenge. I genuinely appreciate you for it.
Okay.
So hold me accountable. I'm going to make it happen.
Absolutely. There we go.
Thank you so much, Darren.
Thank you. Appreciate it.